Welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
There was a time when, to insult a politician, we would accuse such of lying, and the politician would take offense in that fact. Today, lying is acceptable at all levels of our government, including the executive branch. It becomes the norm in the Republican Party as a matter of business. People say that education is very expensive. My rebuttal is, try ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represents the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday.
And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. There was a time here in America, politics was a very interesting element in our lives. Two major political parties had a very common goal: to perfect the union, to make lives better for the constituent. Yes, there were always fights between the two major political parties. The Republican claiming high ground in Christian conservative, being fiscally conservative, and so on. And the Democrat Party fight for a number of rights for all citizens. But the ultimate objective for both parties were to make things better for the constituent, thus the country. There was one common goal. Quite a few decades ago, or it started a few decades ago, that this objective is no longer. That's the reason for the past few decades we have been talking about the big divide in the country. The big divide is not between Democrats and Republicans. In fact, in all fairness, that big divide could have been talked about a long time ago because there was really a stark difference between the two major parties. For instance, Republicans would fight tooth and nail against homosexuality. Democrats, on the other hand, would fight for the rights of homosexuals. This is a big divide. But this divide is really no longer. People in both political parties realize that indeed those individuals who are homosexual or lesbian, they too have the right to be whatever they so choose. There was a time when Republicans claimed to be, well, the only party that could protect the country, the hawkish party, the party that would take the country to war at a moment's notice. Well, that veil has also been removed. In fact, the past few decades have proven one thing, that Republicans have been very careless. And they no longer have that title. There was a time when Republicans used to see themselves as, well, the fiscally conservative party because, gee, we don't want to spend a lot of money. For the past few decades, that has proven completely untrue. All in all, the past few decades have taught us one thing, that there is really not much difference anymore between the two major political parties. As such, the problem, that particular problem, causes another even more serious problem. Republicans adopted a different strategy. They have become masters of deception. They can no longer rely on being the one to protect the country. They can no longer rely on the party that's fiscally conservative. They can no longer rely on the party that has higher moral ground. As such, in order to distinguish themselves from the Democrat, they have to have a way out of this predicament they created for themselves. And we have seen increasingly that Republican legislators, elected officials have become masters of deception. The idea of politician lying is not new. In fact, that has been almost a mantra for politicians. And the idea that Donald Trump is a professional liar is true, but Donald Trump is not the one that has made the Republican Party a party that lies to its constituent. As I mentioned earlier, the Republican Party has become a party of deception. No longer would a representative be able to make a case in order to win vote or support from the constituent. They have to literally lie to the constituent. The biggest weapon has always been to deceive. But unfortunately as well, they have a mouthpiece, a propaganda machine that amplifies their message. We're referring to Fox. As their deception is catching up with them, now they resort to another even more nefarious strategy to win support. Turn their constituent into ignorant. And thus lies the serious danger for our democracy. You may have heard in the introduction that ignorance is the biggest threat to our democracy. It is indeed true. Most dictators, all authoritarian, rely exclusively on the ignorance of the people they wish to suppress, to oppress, and to prevent from claiming their rights. Put differently, the Republican Party has resorted to what dictators and authoritarians use to prevent citizens of the country from understanding what their government is doing. It is no longer politics. No, it is not Democrat versus Republican, because the difference really doesn't exist anymore. Now it is a fight between the ignorant and the smart or the intelligent. You see the difference between an intelligent individual And an ignorant one is the fact that the intelligent individual knows the limitation. The ignorant doesn't. The intelligent individual knows that he or she is not in possession of all answers, of all knowledge. The ignorant individual doesn't. As such, it was very easy. It was extremely easy. In fact, it was baffling. It left all political pundits, people, seasoned politicians who have watched or been in politics for decades, scratching their head and asking the troubling question: how in the world a moron, an incompetent individual such as Donald Trump could become the president of the United States? The answer is actually very simple. The Republican Party has become a party of ignorance anyone can manipulate. And Donald Trump, being very good, a professional at lying, was able to exploit the weakness of the constituent. No, it wasn't the work of Donald Trump that turned all those Republicans into ignorant. It was in the making for decades. Republican legislators, elected officials have been working for decades to turn their constituent into ignorant, into people who would accept any lie that they are told. The path was clear for Donald Trump to simply sail through and become the 45th president of the United States. And with that comes the danger, the jeopardy for our democracy. When we return, we will show you how critical that is, how bad it is, and if nothing is done, future generations may not enjoy the freedom that we enjoy today. You see, democracy can go away. And we will show you it is extremely urgent, especially if you are a young individual, 15 plus. The future of this country, the future of this republic is on your shoulder. And it is extremely important that you pay close attention. If not, the consequences are dire. And there will be only one political party to blame for that. We'll be right back. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social, political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. individuals who have never lived in any other country, who were born here in the United States, who simply study history, may have an idea of what it means not to live in a country which support the system of democracy. But unfortunately, the experience of living in such country is much more valuable than reading in the book to understand the importance of such. Here in America, it is almost impossible to fathom the idea of no democracy, right? It's almost as if it's impossible. Well, it is not. In 1933, Germany, which was a republic, a democratic system, appointed Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany. It had a president and a chancellor. The chancellor is the individual that the world mostly know of. For instance, if I were to ask today, who is the president of Germany, very few people would be able to answer that question. But everybody knows Angela Merkel because she has been the one who is the face of Germany, both inside the country and outside the country. So it was also in 1933. So when Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, just like Angela Merkel, he pretty much managed the country, both locally and internationally. But there was a president until July of 1934, when the president died. At that point, that's when Adolf Hitler grabbed power, did not let an election for another president happen, and he became the Führer, commander-in-chief. And the idea of democracy in Germany ended until, of course, World War II. So you see, any country can lose its democracy. And the root is ignorance. It was the ignorance of the people who cheered Adolf Hitler, who admired, who revered even Adolf Hitler, who would become later a monster for the world. As such, as we know, a couple of days ago, 40 senators, both Democrat and Republican, published an op-ed. And the op-ed pretty much is a cry for the senators, the congressmen, the legislative body, do something. Because those senators, those former senators, say the country is in serious trouble. Our democracy is in jeopardy. Now let me read to you. It's not a long letter, it's a short letter, but I will read the first few paragraphs to give you a sense as to what those former senators felt need to happen. That op-ed was a letter to the senators who are currently in the legislative body. Say, dear Senate colleagues, as former members of the US Senate, Democrats and Republicans, it is our shared view that we are entering a dangerous period, and we feel an obligation to speak up about serious challenges to the rule of law, the Constitution, our governing institution, and our national security. We are on the eve of the conclusion of Special Counsel Robert Mueller investigation and the House commencement of investigation of the president and his administration. The likely convergence of these two events will occur at a time when simmering regional conflicts and global power confrontation continue to threaten our security, our economy, and the geopolitical stability. It is a time, like other critical junctures in our history, when our nation must engage at every level with strategic precision and the hand of both the president and the Senate. And of course, the letter went on to say that because, of course, this administration is mired in a scandal, in corruption, and in a lot of investigation, that is not possible. And as such, it falls on the Senate to do what the Senate was created for, a check on the executive branch. Now, it is a dire call to the senators, obviously, that our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Now, it is 2018. It is a call that I personally has been screaming at the top of my lung to the country to pay attention to, and I started to scream so loud that I felt that I lost my voice. On April 4, 2016, I wrote an op-ed, "Disloyalty to America gave us Donald Trump." Actually, rather on April 4th, 2017. "Disloyalty to America gave us Donald Trump" is what the first paragraph says. Donald Trump happens to America because of the entrenched disloyalty to the country. Most Republicans, emphasis on most, legislators included, are not loyal to the United States of America. Gibberish, you might say or think. Can you explain why representatives such as Devin Nunes, Paul Ryan are engaged in cover-up for what could be the biggest scandal in the existence of the Republic? Can you explain why most Republicans are out there defending a president which, by any analysis, seems to have collaborated with a foreign entity? You see, patriotism is not an expression or a word to just toss around to make one feel good. But most importantly, the legislative body job, main principal job, is to make certain that when the nation has a rogue president, an incompetent president, a president that could be a traitor to the nation, the job of the legislative body is to make certain that the country is not run amok by that rogue agent. As it is today, this is not what's happening. So we cannot talk about a Republican legislative body that is patriotic. It is easy to say whatever one wants to say. Don't tell me what you are. Show me. It is easy to say you are patriot. Or is it because you stand up and put your hand on your chest and that makes you a patriot? On April 12, 2017, now what you're currently looking at is the first time that I wrote an article which was accompanied by a video. And that was the first time since I started to write that I found it necessary, important enough, critical to actually speak. And the reason was very simple. The country was going through a critical moment, a presidential election during which one of the nominees, the Republican nominee, overtly invited a foreign entity to meddle in our internal affairs. Yes, most people just shrug it off as if that wasn't important. But the silence of some, the indifference of others, not only gave us this 45th president, but give the country an individual who, for the first time in the history of the Republic, may be a foreign agent, may have collaborated with a foreign entity in order to damage our system of democracy. While it was cheering moment, celebratory moment for Republican because their nominee won, but it was one of the darkest moments in the history of the United States. And I recognize that when it happened, when the Republican constituent, were cheering at the idea of a foreign entity involving in our internal affairs. And listen to the 3-minute video, which show how grave I believe at that time it was, and how important for the Republican constituent, to have given up on the idea of supporting the political party in order to defend the country. That's what a patriot does. I remember when I published that article, a number of Trump supporters believed that it was okay. At that time, it was WikiLeaks. We didn't know then that WikiLeaks was a front for Russia to destroy our system of government. But it was critical enough to understand that when a foreign entity, individual or state, get involved in our system of government, we can no longer speak about democracy, because at that point, every single guardrail was removed, and the country suffered greatly, and we continue to suffer. Let's take a listen at that particular video, and when we come back, we will continue with the conversation about war on blacks, the slave trade.
Hi, my name is Mike Duchenne, founder of the People Branch. For over 3 years now, I have been sharing my thoughts, my ideas, publish my comments on many political and social issues, usually in writing. Today, however, I find it absolutely necessary, extremely important, to verbalize my opinions in regards to the presidential election. See, much too much is at stake. No, it's not about Donald Trump. it's not about Hillary Clinton either. It's about Julian Assange. He's the founder of WikiLeaks. He makes it his mission to influence the outcome of the presidential elections. Some of you may welcome the idea. Others probably dread such event. Whichever side you're on, this is very troubling. Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Mr. Assange's ability to impact our elections is not an event any patriot American should look forward to. And it's not just about presidential election. It can impact congressional election as well. Put simply, Mr. Assange can run the United States of America the way he sees fit. We Americans cannot allow Assange, or anybody else for that matter, dictate how we run our country and who runs our country. I come to you, I need your help. I need your help to stop Mr. Assange from interfering in our election, meddling in our politics, and jeopardizing our democracy. Join the hashtag #BackOffAssange movement to stop Mr. Assange and send him back to the backwoods of Australia where he belongs. Thank you.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
War on blacks. We are not talking about slave trades. The purpose of this topic is to shed light on why today here in America racism, discrimination is so rampant.
In the introduction, I provided in brief conversation why we have two completely separate countries when it comes to whites. There is a group, and it is a large group, millions of them, who are racist, who continue to practice discrimination. And there is another group, millions of them, who have always been sympathizers of blacks' plight in the country. They understand more or less the predicament blacks has been in. And I made reference to the fact that during the Civil War, you have in one side whites who want to keep slavery around, and on the other side, blacks and whites fighting to end slavery. And it has never changed. But in order to address the problem, racism in the country, we ought to understand where it comes from, the roots. And for that, we've been following the money, as it is in every aspect of every problem in the world. It is very easy to find the roots of the problem if one is patient enough to simply follow the money. As such, we began the discussion on war on blacks, looking at slave trades. Why should you care about slave trades? It's over. There is no more slave trades, right? There is no more slavery. Besides, what do you have to do with that? You weren't around when slavery was fledgling here in this country. So why should you care? If you are white, you have everything to do with it, albeit indirectly. Your ancestors, great grandparents had slaves. Your great grandparents, your great grandparents, your great grandparents, your grandparents, they had slaves. So indirectly, if you are white, you are as concerned about the topic of trade slaves or slaves trade as blacks are. Now, yes, you weren't around, but you also ought to know and understand that your ancestors treated blacks worse than animals. They beat them, they tortured them, they chained them, and they even fought in the Civil War to keep them in their inhuman condition. Now, when we talk about slavery, when the notion of slavery is tossed into the conversation, it is so remote in people's mind that it doesn't really have any impact on anyone because, well, it's just a piece of conversation. Well, there was a slave in the United States. There is no more slave. I guess everybody should go about their business and everything is hunky-dory. That would have probably been okay if indeed the vestiges of slavery were completely erased. In fact, if you take a trip around the country as a black individual, you'll find out that things are not as good as when you sit in Washington or in major cities where there are so many different groups of people, race, class, social classes, and so on, you may not even realize how bad things are in the United States of America when it comes to race relation, that is. And that's the reason we talk about it, because it has been such a sacred aspect of lives here in the United States that nobody wants to talk about it, because, you know, that will upset some people. It will upset blacks, it will upset white, it will cause problems. If a black individual at the workplace were to raise the issue that I didn't get this job despite the fact I'm qualified, then the only possible explanation to that is, ta-da, I'm black. And suddenly the whole aspect of the environment changed, the whole conversation changed. But when you look seriously into the matter, that was indeed the reason. I actually gave many examples about that. But let's go on with the slave trades. If you are white, the conversation about slave trade should be of concern to you, because you, unless you came in this country after slavery, you weren't born in this country, your parents came after slavery, there is a very great likelihood that your parents, your ancestors, own slave, some more than others, some 50, 30. Of course, there are a few, just like any other luxury item that whites had at that time. Slaves were searched because you have to pay for it. It wasn't free. And we'll continue that conversation and show also that when we talk about slaves trade, it is a simple expression, but behind that expression, there are so many things that's hidden. And we will explore, we will peel the veil behind that simple expression that seems to hide most of what that period in the history of America, dark period in American history, had. So if you are white, you ought to be as concerned as blacks, because as I mentioned, if you can say with high degree of certainty that your ancestors, whoever that is, great grandparents, and so on and so forth, came here in the United States after slavery has been abolished, then you may not necessarily be most concerned about this conversation, although what has been going on in the white circle may be of concern to you as well. But if your ancestors were here before slavery ended, you are definitely directly involved in this conversation. And there is a need to understand it to grasp why we still have racism in this country, why so many whites still continue to discriminate. It's not out of the blue, and because nobody ever took the time to talk about it, to go into the roots of the problem, then there cannot be any solution. There is nothing in this world that we can solve without understanding the cause. Even in the domain, in the scientific domain, medicine and so on, you notice that anything that if we ought to bring a cure for a disease, it has to be understood. It has to, they have to die to dissect the component that creates a problem. If you remember, a few years back, there was Ebola that was spreading like wildfire across the world, and scientists were rushing against time to understand the disease in order to create a cure. It goes in everything in life. Now, if you are white and your ancestors been here before slavery, you are concerned. You may have not been born yet, but the story have been in your families for many decades now. Chances are your ancestors owned slaves, and they may have passed down, interestingly enough, part of the stories. This is human nature. You know, the part which paint your ancestors as very good in understanding slave masters. Yep. Your ancestors would tell, this is how the story would come down to you as a white individual who born, I don't know, maybe 4th generation, 5th generation, whatever that is. The story about your ancestors who owned slaves, that story, whatever those stories rather, are being passed down, and you have a picture of your great 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 grandpa who owned slaves. Well, that was happening at that time, but your great 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 grandpa was a very good and understanding slave master. That's the picture that's painted to you. Yes, your great grandfather was really a very good and decent man. He treated people really slave, but he treated them right. Good slave masters. What an oxymoron. Now, if you hear that story in your family, guaranteed it's false. You're white. You were born in a family whose ancestors were here before slavery, and of course throughout until the end of slavery. Chances are the story that you've been hearing about your great 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 grandpa, who was such a nice man, such a lovely man, such an understanding slave master, not true, was untrue. Yes, he could have been a good man for his family, no doubt. He would take care of his family. He could have been the funniest man in the family. He could have been the most helpful man in the family. In fact, he could have been the best husband, the best father. No argument there. But no, he was not a good slave master. How can I possibly know that? You see, slave owners, when they make a purchase of a slave, which we will also show you a picture rendering of this particular activity. It's selling human being. But there is more to that than just selling, trafficking human being. Because even up to today, underground, there are still those things going on. But it's not, it sounds, the term itself doesn't really explain the horror behind these activities. And that's what we will show you as to why blacks, especially blacks in the South, why they feel the way that they feel about whites. they have good reason, and why whites, mostly in the South, feel the way that they feel about blacks, and they do have reason, not good reason, but they do have reason. And we will explore that. And as we go forward with this topic, you will get an understanding as to why racism, discrimination are mostly in one part of the country. You find more of that than in the north part of the country, and you will understand why too. So there was no good slave master, because the product that they purchased, the slave, they saw that product as a way for them to increase their wealth, as a way for them to become, just like you see today, for instance, just to put it in perspective, just like you see today that millionaires are really in a rush to be even richer than the other millionaire in the neighborhood. Billionaires are in a rush, in a race to be the first or the richest person in the world. So there has always been a race to the top by people of all walks of life, of all social classes. And it wasn't any different at that time. So if someone nearby, a white individual, owned 50 slaves and you only own 30, that means the one that owned 50 slaves was doing much better financially than the individual who owned only 30 slaves. And because those slaves, there was no machine to work the land, there was no machine to take care of their farming, agriculture was pretty much the way whites in that part of the country was getting richer and richer. So having as many slaves to work the land and to be able to produce and make money, that was their thing. So there was no such thing as good slave masters, because they beat the crap out of those slaves, they tortured them, they even stamped them like animal. Really, those iron I'm not sure what they call it, that they put in fire and make it hot enough to mark the animal that says it belongs to so and so. They did that to those slaves. There was no good slave master. So the story you're hearing about your great grandpa who was a decent man, a good and understanding slave master, absolutely false, 100% false. Because the only thing those individuals were concerned about is to use those assets that they had, the slave, to make money for them, and they used whatever method was needed in order to keep those slaves in line. They chained them, they beat them, they tortured them, they killed them. In fact, they didn't have to report to anyone about killing a black slave, because that was their property. So when you hear a story in your family about your ancestors who owned slaves, keep in mind that the story, the great story you hear, if it has to do with grandpa being a great, your ancestor being a good man, a good husband, etc., no one can argue about that. But if you hear the word good slave master, absolutely untrue, 100% untrue, because the way that slave owner treated slave slave was horrific, inhuman. There was no good slave master. Now, what they skip in the story is the part that the fortune that they made, the great fortune that today, when you hear whites talking about how their lives are better, and then blacks are a bunch of lazy folks who do not want to work, sometimes I don't know, most black may not necessarily be aware of their own of the story, but when a white individual label a black as lazy, it is insulting, twice as insulting, because of the fact that the part of the story that's missing in the conversation is the fact that whites subjected blacks to 18 plus hours a day working on the field, and today for whites to have the gall to call blacks lazy. So let's move on, and I will come back to that part to explain why there are so many negative labels that whites, especially those who discriminate the races, why there are so many negative labels that they use for blacks. It's not just, there is a history behind that. And we will get to that as we talk about this aspect of race relation in America. Now, when you hear story from family members talking about your great-great-great-grandpa who was slave owner, they miss the part that they made fortune, and that's the reason your life is better today than your black counterpart. It's because the black counterpart, his ancestor were working the field and was not getting paid for that. And we will get to that, and we'll show you this succession, how our society has not only deprived blacks of the opportunity to make something for themselves, but they continue to oppress black and at the same time put labels on them to let you know, well, blacks are bad. That's the reason they're in the predicament that they're in. But the story is lost because nobody really goes back to see how the story progresses and why most blacks have to struggle financially in comparison to their white counterpart. Now, in your family telling you the story about your ancestor, great-great-grandpa, who was a slave master, a slave owner, there is no good slave owner. They made a fortune on the back of the slave. They despised, they mistreated, and they fought on the Civil War to keep enslaved. You know, the good and understanding slave masters. Now, what they skip is also the part that their hatred for blacks has everything to do with the loss of free labor. You know, when the emancipation happened, then whites in the South, remember their life, the plushy, the financial life, the life that they enjoy while they drinking tea, coffee, celebrating birthday, anniversary, going to events, and blacks are in the field working 18 plus hours. And suddenly, the emancipation takes all that away. The hatred that whites have for black originates from some aspect of that. And we will delve into those details later, but we're just going through the list to give you an understanding that the nice great-great-grandpa that was a slave master was a monster when it comes to the slaves. There was no good slave master. He was a monster. By any, no matter which way you spin it, any slave owner was a slave monster. They skipped the part where they would hunt any slave who escaped from their inhuman treatment. Yes, sometimes slaves do run because once they find an opportunity to get the hell out of the predicament, they would run. And guess what would happen? That nice great grandpa, nice understanding slave master that they paint to you would hunt that slave. And if they cannot capture, they would shoot him down and kill him. Yes, that nice grandpa, that decent grandpa, they would hunt. And if they find that slave and they able to capture that slave, they would torture him. Sometimes they would cut a limb in order to make an example out of him so that the others fears enough so that they don't do that too. So they skip that part for you. They skip the part where they would kill them if they found them, and there is no being charged of murder because, hey, a slave was a property. So yes, that great grandpa that your family paint to you, that was such a great man, such a good man, such a decent man, yes, that great grandpa would hunt the slave down. And remember, the slave was running away from the inhuman treatment. And inhuman treatment they had. But when your nice great grandpa found that slave, it would have been better for him to be killed. Because what that slave would go through, sometimes they pin the slave down on the hot soil. Both hands pinned down on the soil, both feet, and then with a lash. They were lashing on his back, no clothes on, until he bleeds. Yes, that nice grandpa that your family has been telling you was a good and decent slave master. What they skip in the story is to tell you that, well, they would hang disobedient slave publicly to make an example and instill fear on the others, the slave that managed to escape. Sometimes, if they really cannot get to that slave to grab the slave, and they shoot and nothing happened, and they finally get hold of that slave, they would hang that slave in public so that the other slave know if they too try that, this is what awaits them. Yes, that nice, lovely grandpa that they paint to you that was a decent slave master would do that. They skip the part where they gather to celebrate holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries while the slaves were on the field, working under scorching sun or shivering cold with no proper clothing. Well, they were slaves. You know, the nice grandpa figured out, hey, they're slave. They might as well learn to live that way. They skipped the part where they prevented the slave from learning to read and to write. Why do you think there are so many blacks, especially in the South, that are so far back when it comes to knowledge? It wasn't because they didn't want to. Their slave master, you know, the nice, lovely, great grandpa who was a decent man. Yes, that grandpa, the grandpa that they painted to you that was so decent, would prevent slaves from learning to read and to write, because if they do, they would be able to figure out how to do things. They skipped the part in which that they would cut, literally cut, like hand, fingers, a limb from a slave as a reminder not to disobey the master in the future. Yes, your great, lovely grandpa, great grandpa, ancestor, who was that nice slave master, would do that. They skipped the part where they would just slap them around, men, for no reason. You know what else they skip? They skip the part where your ancestor, the great grandpa, the nice guy, the lovely guy who was so decent, who treated people really with respect, they skip the part where they rape slave women as often as they wanted. Yes, that great grandpa. They skip all of that when they're telling you the story. What they remember to tell you, interestingly enough, they have great memory when it comes to those things. They remember to tell you that, well, blacks are inferior to whites and they are violent people. They remember to tell you that because up to today, this has been so much ingrained into the white community that that's what you hear. They tell you that blacks are violent. In fact, that's the reason, if you remember, that every police officer who gunned down a black individual, unarmed black individual, always tell you that he was afraid for his life. They remember clearly to tell you that blacks are criminal because they were fighting their ways out of slavery. You know, they were doing anything and everything possible to get out of the predicament. They tell you they're criminal because of that. They had that vivid memory to tell you that that black slave who was the property of owner so-and-so, you know what he did one night? He wake up in the middle of the night and whack the master and all the people in the house and then escape. Oh, they had that great memory to tell you that was what happened. They had that vivid memory to tell you that blacks are thieves. You know why? Because they had to steal food from the master who did not feed them and forced them to work 18 hours a day. And when the master felt that that's not enough, he starved them to death. Now, when they take some food, of course, they had to steal the food, but they say they are thieves. But they have that vivid memory when that black guy, that black man or that black woman who was a slave, the master found that he or she was stealing food from the, well, maybe there was no fridge, from whatever, and then eating it in hiding behind the door. You know, those thieves, they have that vivid memory to tell you about those blacks. They have that really impeccable memory to tell you that, you know, Jack was a slave. The master trusted him and let him in his household to run things. And then one night, you know what Jack did? Jack killed the master and the whole family, and then and free a bunch of other slaves and just escaped. They had that vivid memory of that monster slave, Jack, who did something like that to the master, who was so good to him. That is vivid, great memory that they had of blacks being violent. Wow, those slaves should have had more decency, they said. They should have had more humanity that they preach. Oh, the irony of racism, the irony of discrimination in America. And when we delve into the details of that time in our history to see how much those blacks, those slaves, were being mistreated, and if they tried to escape or it was considered a sin that deserved death, nothing but death. If they try to escape and hit someone on the way out, oh gee, those people are violent. And they had to steal because they work 18 hours, they weren't getting paid, and yet the master don't think that's enough punishment, starve them to death, that they steal something so that they can survive. They call them thieves. You know, great nice grandpa, you know, the slave master who was so good to slaves. Yes, that great grandpa, that nice man that they paint to you that was so good. There was no nice slave master. There was no nice slave owner. All slave owners were monsters in the stricter sense of the word. So if you come from a family that were here before slavery, you are as concerned about this predicament that whites put blacks in, and now that blacks still suffered of. You're not exempt because, well, gee, it's not me, it was my ancestors. Well, your ancestors' actions have today's implication for blacks. Because your ancestor was enjoying a good life, went to school and so on, and passed down from generation to generation. The blacks, on the other hand, stay back from generation to generation, slave, never learned to read or to write. And of course, what do you expect if you come out of the predicament? You don't know how to read or write. You don't have any skill. Yes, you will always be behind. Now, that story is lost whenever you hear whites talking about blacks. The war on blacks didn't start yesterday. It started 269 years ago here in America. Worldwide, it started 373 years ago. And that will give you a sense, not only the understanding of the history of race relation in general, but race relation in America, and so that we can understand exactly why we still have the predicament that we have today in America when it comes to race relation. I'll be right back. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. I do thank you for spending the time with me, and I hope those information are, well, sensitive but important information that can help you understand the state of affairs in terms of race relation in America. And I hope you can join me again tomorrow at 2 p.m. We will also continue the conversation on the seriousness or the jeopardy that our democracy has been going through. And it is equally as important because, as mentioned earlier, that democracy is an important part of our lives here in the United States. But as much as and as long as it had been, there is also the possibility that it can be lost. Yes, we today may think it is impossible because we have been living this life for the longest and we cannot really imagine any possibility of losing that. But rest assured that the erosion of a system of democracy does not happen overnight. Let me remind you that Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933. But it was not until July of 1934, almost 18 months later, that he had made Germany a non-democratic country. Which means it takes time to lose what is important, what is necessary for a nation, for a people. And if we are not vigilant, we, maybe not us here, maybe the next generation, maybe 2 generations down the road, would not have the opportunity to enjoy the kind of freedom we have for the past 2 centuries. So it is important to be vigilant, but even more importantly, when we have members of a political party who have relinquished their duty to protect our republic from falling into this type of predicament. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good afternoon, and I hope to see you tomorrow. I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The 4th Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the 4th Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing Ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.